everybody, my name is Chris Groggins and I'm co-founder and partner of Esports Development and Growth Enterprise, also known as Edge Consulting. And today we'll be discussing information and technology in esports. In the first part of this workshop series, we'll cover slides 1 through 9, discuss how information and technology have helped advance the field of esports, and review the basics of networking and hardware in esports. Before we start discussing information and technology within the industry, we actually have to define what esports is. A general definition of esports is the competitive video game industry and tournaments. If you look at the lecture slides provided, you'll see a more scholarly or more advanced definition of esports that adds elements such as organization, competitions, and audiences or spectators. But now that we know what esports is, let's actually talk about the evolution of esports and how technology might have played a role in that. Gaming looked completely different in the late 1800s. Rather than video game consoles and PCs, gaming really revolved itself around cards and board games. Companies like Nintendo actually got their gaming start selling playing cards rather than consoles. As we transitioned from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, we saw penny arcades becoming hugely popular in the United States. These machines were actually mechanical, so they didn't rely on electricity or much technology. Rather, you would put in a penny and then pull a lever and the game would play itself. As we continue to look at the history of gaming, we see pinball becoming hugely popular in the 30s and 40s. Pinball was actually outlawed in major cities though because it was linked to gambling and maybe the mob. After pinball, we started to see consoles and arcade games actually hitting the market. So in the early 70s, we saw the first at-home console called the Magnavox Odyssey being sold in stores. Then in the mid to late 70s, we started to see arcade games becoming popular in the United States. These are arcade games that you probably remember. Titles like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Galaga, Space Invaders. These are the arcade cabinets that you would go, put a quarter in, and play with your friends. In the early to mid 80s, we started to see at-home computers hit the market, which almost made consoles obsolete. It wasn't until 1985 that we saw the console industry revived in the United States, and it was due to the Nintendo and Sega hitting the market. Throughout the 80s and 90s, we started to see small LAN events taking place. LAN stands for Local Area Network, and we'll talk about it in a bit. But just know that this was a huge trend at the time and started to help popularize gaming in the United States on a national scale. And then finally, esports today is a global phenomenon. We're seeing these LAN events on a global scale with thousands of people in attendance and hundreds of people competing on the stage. These LAN events also include broadcast or production so that tens of thousands of people can also watch it online. It's clear information and technology has helped accelerate the growth of the esports industry. Specifically, hardware, broadcast production, and competition have helped the industry grow exponentially in the last 4 decades. This enhanced technology has helped esports grow by increasing the viewership and attendance of esports events, increasing the availability of esports content, and improving the skills of professional esports players. So not only are we seeing broadcast increase in popularity and in frequency, we're also seeing the people that are playing the games get better over time. And finally, network and cloud technology have also helped accelerate this growth by helping manage the advancements in technology, providing a stable infrastructure for data on a global scale, and allowing for this data to be collected and transferred more easily. Now I'm going to toss it over to Zach so he can explain the basics of esports technology and hardware.
Hi, my name is Zach Harrington, co-founder and partner of Esports Development and Growth Enterprise, also known as Edge Consulting, and I'm here today to talk to you about the basics of esports hardware and technology. Let's start by talking about networking. Esports competitions take place typically in one of 2 fashions, either over the internet or on a local area network or LAN. So let's begin by defining what a LAN is. A LAN is a series of connected computers within a contained space, such as in your home, in an office, or at school. The connection to the LAN can be made one of 2 ways. The most common way we see now is through a wireless connection, or what's known as Wi-Fi. However, for esports competition, a wired connection, which is a direct connection from the computer to the router using an Ethernet cable, is what's preferred. Wireless connections can be subject to instability and outside interference, making them not ideal for esports competitions, as we want the most consistent and stable connection possible. Now that we have a basic understanding of the hardware that allows you to connect to the internet and compete in esports, let's talk about some of the terms that actually affect performance. Let's start by talking about latency, or what's more commonly known as ping. Latency is simply the measure of how long it takes for information to be sent from your computer to the server and back again. Lower latency is better for gaming. High latency can result in delayed actions taking place in-game, as well as you not receiving the most current and updated information about what's going on. As an example, in a fighting game, if you have high latency, you may press the button to input an attack, but see a noticeable delay between when the action takes place and when you press the button. An advantage to playing esports competitions on LAN as opposed to over the internet is that the latency is often much, much lower, typically to the point to where it is unnoticeable, making it for the most fair and accurate competition possible. Now that we have an understanding of what latency is and how that affects performance in esports and gaming, let's talk about another commonly used term, bandwidth. Bandwidth is often used to describe the speed of an internet connection. However, that is not entirely accurate. Bandwidth is simply the measure of the maximum amount of data that can be transmitted over a connection at a given time. The good news is that within esports, many gaming titles are optimized to use very little bandwidth, so most modern high-speed connections will have the bandwidth necessary to support esports and gaming. Where this becomes a consideration is if you add other activities such as live streaming on top of that, as that requires a far greater amount of bandwidth than just simply gaming. So how does this all tie together and impact your performance in esports and gaming? Well, if we think of your internet or network connection as a highway and the data being sent as cars on that highway, the bandwidth would be the number of lanes available. The more lanes there are, the more cars or more information can be sent at once. The latency is how long it takes for the cars to run the length of that highway and back. If you don't have enough bandwidth, it creates a traffic jam and it takes longer for the cars to go to and from, thus increasing the latency. There are other factors that impact this as well. For example, if a highway is in disrepair and cars run off the road and don't reach their destination, that's what's referred to as packet loss. Let's talk about some of the basics of network security and things that you should look out for and ways that you can prevent attacks on your personal network. The main way to protect your network and your computer is to conceal your IP address or Internet Protocol address. Your IP address is the location on the network of a device. If somebody has access to your IP address, it will allow them to interfere with your network and do things such as create a DDoS attack or distributed denial of service attack. A DDoS attack is most commonly done by flooding a network with information, overloading its resources, and eating up all the bandwidth, thus causing the network to not function properly. Another way that you can protect yourself against attacks such as DDoS attacks is through a VPN or virtual private network. A virtual private network uses a secure point-to-point connection to conceal your IP address, and it also allows you to appear as if you're logging into the internet from a different geographical location. This allows you to bypass region locks for competition within games as well as content on the internet. VPNs are not typically used within esports as they can increase latency because there are more stops that the information has to pass through before reaching its destination. Now that we've established a basic understanding of networking, let's go ahead and talk about hardware. We'll start off by talking about PC hardware. A PC is made up of several components, and you can find the list and descriptions within the supplementary materials provided. The piece of hardware we want to focus the most on is the GPU or graphics processing unit, more commonly known as the graphics card. A dedicated graphics card is what separates a standard PC from a gaming PC, and it's what impacts performance within gaming most heavily. The frame rate, or frames per second, that you see in-game is mostly influenced by how powerful the graphics processing unit is. Other components can have an impact on gaming performance. However, if you follow the minimum recommended guidelines in the supplementary material, they should not be an issue, and your performance should really be dictated by your GPU. Even though a majority of esports competitions take place on PC, we still do see a number of competitions taking place on consoles. Most frequently, we'll see this with console-exclusive titles. If you are competing on a console, it is still recommended that you connect the console to a gaming monitor as opposed to a television, as it will give you better performance. And that'll wrap us up for Part 1, the basics of esports hardware and networking. We'll be back in Part 2, where we'll discuss advancements in esports technology and emerging technologies in esports.